Was Syrian President Assad, who ordered snipers to fire on UN inspectors? Snipers opening fire on inspectors' vehicles today as the UN team tries to investigate whether the Syrian government used chemical weapons against innocent civilians or not. But the Obama administration doesn't need more proof. Secretary of State John Kerry calling the chemical attack undeniable and a moral obscenity.
What we saw in Syria last week should shock the conscience of the world. It defies any code of morality. Let me be clear. The indiscriminate slaughter of civilians, the killing of women and children and innocent bystanders by chemical weapons is a moral obscenity. By any standard, it is inexcusable, and despite the excuses and equivocations that some have manufactured, it is undeniable.
And 1 year ago, President Obama warned Syria that a chemical attack would cross a red line. So now what? Former UN Ambassador John Bolton joins us. Good evening, sir. And I guess the question is, what do we do now?
Well, I think what President Obama is going to do is launch some sort of military strike against Syria, because now the second time his red line has been undeniably crossed. I think he has a real credibility problem in his own mind if he doesn't do something. That doesn't mean he has the slightest idea what the strategic effect of the use of military force is going to be. I think that red line quotation 1 year ago, a few months before the 2012 election, was one of those rhetorical flourishes that the president likes. He never thinks through the implications. We're now going to have military action. I think that's almost unavoidable. We have no idea what its impact will be inside Syria.
What about its impact outside Syria? We've got things like Russia. I mean, what's Russia going to? Russia's chummy with Syria, and they're not going to be. I mean, this isn't going to help things there.
No, I'm not. I don't think being concerned with how offended or not Russia or Iran or others might be. I think this still has to be a calculation of what's in America's national interest. I think those chemical weapons are dangerous. If the president's going to use any military force, what he ought to do is try and destroy the chemical weapons. Of course, every day that he waits, every day that he dithers, every day that he looks for some amorphous international approval gives the Assad regime the chance to move those chemical weapons and hide them.
How easy is it to move them?
Well, I think it's easy to move them. If I were the Assad regime, I'd store them in basements of apartment buildings in Damascus. I'd put them in heavily populated civilian areas. I'd take my command, control, communication structures of my military and I'd disperse them. I think that's what he's going to try and do. That's why the president's inability to articulate exactly what his objective is so telling. Kerry talks about a moral obscenity. Okay, let's assume that it is a moral obscenity. I think it is. He didn't say it was illegal, which would be their first preference, because Syria didn't sign the Chemical Weapons Convention. He's not going to get United Nations approval, which would be the Obama administration's second choice, because Russia and China will veto. So now we're down to an appeal to morality. 100,000 people have been killed in Syria. Let's say 2,000 were killed by chemical weapons. What is it that makes it 50 times more immoral to use chemical weapons that's finally got the Obama administration to move?
All right, well, I mean, look, I just looked at the timeline I had pulled up. May 19, 2011, President Obama said that the Syrian government must stop shooting its own demonstrators, allow human rights monitors to have access to cities, much like we have today, only it's chemical weapons and it's UN inspectors. Then May 19th, he said we've stepped up our sanctions on the Syrian regime. That's 2011. July 2011, we keep the pressure up to see if we can bring some real change in Syria. That didn't happen. January 24th, 2012, State of the Union speech, a year and a half ago, he says, I have no doubt the Assad regime will soon discover the force of change can't be reversed and that human dignity can't be denied. Nothing happened. February 6, 2012, on NBC, he said once again that the noose is tightening around Assad. Nothing happened. March 4th, 2012, he said the Assad regime is crumbling. March 6, 2012, he said it's not a question of when Assad leaves or if he, it's not a question of when Assad leaves or if he leaves. It's a question of losing his legitimacy. So, he's been saying this for 2 years and some change.
Sure. This is all, for the president, foreign policy is all about rhetoric. That's all that he understands about it. Like a legislator or politician, he gives a speech and moves on to something else. Now he has to ask, what are the implications when I use military force? And I would assert the hypothesis that even if he uses military force, even if he uses a lot of military force, we could still end up worse off from America's point of view than if he had done nothing at all.
All right, if we have some strikes now, if that's what's going to happen, tell me the best thing that could happen, and tell me the worst thing that could happen.
Well, the best thing I think that could happen would be he destroys the chemical weapons stockpiles, and Assad has no possibility of using them again. But the real question is, are you going to take action that affects the balance of power inside Syria? Are you going to sufficiently go after Assad for this moral obscenity that it really tips the balance in favor of the rebels? One way to do that would be a decapitation strike. If this is a moral obscenity, go after the person who perpetrated it. I don't think he'll do that.
What's the worst thing that can happen?
Well, the worst that can happen is a few feckless cruise missile launches that really don't have much impact on the ground, and that perpetuates the war. And I think that is the most likely outcome. It would take a character transplant for Obama to move effectively here.
Hey, let me quick back for a second. Did you say that we should do something about Assad?
Well, if you think this is a moral obscenity, shouldn't you go after the person you think ordered the attack?
What do you mean by going after him?
Kill him.
Okay.
That's war. That's what you do in war.
No, I was just trying to figure out exactly what you're saying. I didn't want it to be, I didn't want to gray area. I didn't know exactly what you meant.
Here's the problem. To paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld, you go to war with the president you have. And I don't think this president understands enough about the implications of what he's about to do, or even that he can define what his objective is, that it doesn't put us more at risk of using military force and actually undermining our long-term interest, with Iran in particular.